in. So thank you all for creating the time and the space to join us here today. I am so excited to kick this off with you all and dive into evolving education. Like I mentioned, we are actually using Slack instead of the Zoom chat. So you're going to want to make sure that you're in Slack and you're in the channel that says LCC Book Club Evolving Education. That's where we'll add links and reactions and different things that we're learning. So thanks again for being here, and let's get started. All right, so as we dive in together, I wanted to share our learner-centered collaborative norms as we think about how to show up today. So these are the norms that we all use at LCC. We are trusted and responsible partners. We are curious and humble learners. We approach our work with courage. We build inclusive communities, and we are impact driven. So all of the work that we do, we hope that we hold these to our core. So what I was thinking today is the way that we could kick off our time together is as you transition into our book club, you could think about those norms. So I'm going to post them in the channel, the LCC Book Club channel. And if you want to select one that you want to hold close to you today, you can show us which one you selected by adding an emoji to the one that you want to keep in focus for you today. For example, I want to keep curiosity at the core of my work today as I show up to the book club. So I'm going to go find that one and add an emoji to we are curious and humble learners. Great, I see some people in there. Clicking away, adding emojis. You all are Slack experts already. Great. All right, so let's get an overview of our book club. So just when I thought it was just enough to have Katie come and join us and share about our book, she said, you know what, I'm gonna invite some special guests to come and chat with you all. So you'll see here that we have Emily today, we have Katie Novak joining us on March 7th, and then we have Caleb joining us on March 14th. So if you can make it, you can hop in and hear them discussing different parts of the book. And keep going. Great. And here we have an overview of our book club. So the way that we designed this book club is that we didn't want the live session to be the only thing that you get to interact with as we dive into this book. So over the weekend, you received a tee-up email that has information about the week, guiding questions, and what part of the book that we were diving into this week. Today, obviously, we have the live session. Tomorrow, what you can expect is a recording of our time together and some prompts for our Bright Spots share on Thursday. If you're already following us on social media, you'll see that on Thursdays, we do something that's called Bright Spots, where we share something that stood out from our week and something that made us feel proud or inspired or energized. And so when we look at this cycle of learning, we'll repeat this 3 times throughout the book club. And our hope is that even if you can't make the live session, that everyone has an opportunity to connect and learn and grow in the way that suits you best. And the one thing I didn't say is that throughout all this time, we hope that the conversation in Slack keeps going. And that was one of the reasons we chose Slack over Zoom, was because when the Zoom call ends, the chat goes away. And what we actually want is people to stay in here and add questions and comments to each other and continue to learn outside of this one time together. All right, great. So we are about to dive in. I want to introduce formally the 2 women that we will be speaking with today. We have Katie Martin, who is a mentor of mine, as well as the Chief Impact Officer at Learner-Centered Collaborative. She is the author of Evolving Education and Learner-Centered Innovation. And what I know to be true about Katie is that she is so deeply passionate about this work, not only at the work she does at LCC, but as a mom and as an educator. I'm so excited for you all to hear from her today. We also have Emily Liebtag with us. She is the Senior Partner for Systems Transformation at Education Reimagined and is also the author of Difference Making at the Heart of Learning and the Power of Place. We feel like she is the perfect person to be here today, as she is equally as passionate about redefining what we want for our students and our different measures of success. So welcome both of you, and we are going to dive in. I think, Katie, let's maximize our time with you
I'm
all.
ready.
So I am going to turn it over to you, and let's dive into evolving education.
Awesome. Thanks, Kels. And thank you all for being here. I am Katie Martin and so excited as we've seen this community emerge and seen all your intros as you were all joining. I'm like, I know them. They posted in the intro. I'm seeing familiar connections and so glad that you're here. We know that the last couple of years, we've all experienced incredible change, lots of discomfort, moments of bright spots. And when I wrote Evolving Education, it was for exactly this moment to come together, to be able to connect with educators all over the world who are thinking differently, that are wondering what's possible. And I really hope that this is what this conversation can be, can light your spark and can get everyone energized and really build those connections, because we know it's going to take all of us doing this work together. If you read the introduction, I've said, my hope is to validate all of the work that you're doing, inspire you with ideas and connections, and ultimately push you to think about doing something different. I know that if we don't do things differently, our students won't experience anything differently. And so as we, engage, and as I bring on Emily shortly, I really want us to think about what's true to really deep in my heart. I believe that as educators, community members, families, organizations, that we have the opportunity, but more importantly, the obligation to really reimagine our education system. And that is not something that any of us can do alone. It's something all of us can do together. So as we think about our own experiences and what's worked, as we think about the science of learning that we know to be true, and we think about the technology and resources we have available, it's an opportunity to really build on the strengths and interests and values of the young people that come into our classrooms. So I want to anchor us in part one. What do we want for learners? This is really about these shifts around who are the young people coming into our classrooms and how do we design the system that supports them, not that makes them conform to a system that we've always had. So I want to start off. I know that Emily really well, a good friend of mine. So glad you're here. Just amazing educator. And Emily, I'd love for you to share with everyone a little bit about your own experiences and what led you to be the educator and leader that you are today.
Sure. And thanks for having me. I just want to name that anyone who is taking time to be in this space with Learner-Centered Collaborative and just everyone else on the call, I know that there's a lot of weight in the world and a lot going on. And so thank you for being here. And if after you want to connect on Slack about all things related to what's going on in the world and you don't have someone to connect with, I can be that person for you and happy to make that space. But thank you for being here. And Katie and Kelsey, you pointed to what I'm going to say and talk a lot about is that it does take a community, right? And that's actually where I think a lot of the answers come from, is within community and within ourselves. But I'll answer your question. I want to start by saying that I think everyone on this call today has it within them already to actually do what it takes to transform education. And I believe that, and I know it's true. I've never met an educator that didn't have it in them. I know it takes time to slow down and have conversations like this and pay attention to what we know about how young people learn, how they grow and develop. And if we do, the answers are right there in front of us, and it doesn't look what a lot of school looks like today, right? But if we slow down and listen to that, a lot of the answers are there. What I don't know, I know that to be true. What I don't know is about your unique community, the challenges you're facing, and exactly what questions it's going to take and what conversations it's going to take to really surface a transformative shift from doing what you're doing right now to doing something different or to doing something even more learner-centered. I'm not going to pretend to know, but I'm glad to be in conversation with you. And I know Katie is as well as everyone else on this call about what that looks like. But what led me to be the educator and leader I am today It's all because of my own journey as a learner. And that journey started with being a very, very curious, but not so great at the game of school learner. I failed out of statistics. I failed out of organic chemistry, actually statistics twice. I failed twice and I still chose to take it again. But that was because I just had this insatiable desire to learn, and I had supports to get me through, really fortunate to have supports to get me through. But I found myself in this quandary, like I loved learning, but I wasn't doing so well. And so I thought, what is it about me, right? Who am I as a learner? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? How do I like to learn? Those questions didn't just come organically. My mom was a really good person at probing, also an educator. And what I learned from unpacking who I was as a learner was that I'm hyper-focused at times. I can be unfocused at other times. I love being active. I love the natural world. I love hip hop. I love plants. There's all these things about me that I could go on about. But the point is, the educator I am with adults, when I'm working with adults or when I'm working with young people, is based off of seeing those things in myself and being an evolving learner and educator myself, and seeing those around me, everyone on this call, as learners too. That's the only way I've been able to make progress and help people fundamentally shape and shift their own practice, is getting them to see themselves as a learner and then noticing, oh, that young person right in front of me is a learner that's just as complex, interesting, gifted, and talented too. And that mindset makes all the difference. And I know we all have our own learner-centered story, right? We all have, Katie, you and I've talked about yours, right? I see Olga and some other people on this call. We've all, it's our own learner-centered story. And I encourage you to think about that, whether you were nurtured as a learner or you weren't. I think it all contributes to how we show up, how we help people develop agency, develop competencies that matter to them, engage them in real world work, and feel connected, is seeing them each as a person and a learner.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Emily, because one of the things that I was just connecting with a group of educators last week, and we were doing the same thing, interrogating our stories and interrogating our own experiences. And it seems like, oh, you're just taking time to get to know each other. There were tears, there were reflections, and that's why I wanted to start there with you. You know, I didn't even get to chemistry or the organic chemistry or statistics in high school because I decided I didn't want to take math because I didn't think that that was important. And it was a gatekeeper for me, right? And there's different ways that our tests and our assumptions kind of sort and rank us. But until we interrogate our own experiences and the impact they've had on us, it's hard to really understand what model we're going at as what we think a good educator is. Because too often I see educators like, oh, don't come in my classroom right now. The kids are a little crazy. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, when I walk in, the kids are engaged and they're learning. And they'll say, well, I don't think that this is how a good educator is running their classroom. And until we start to interrogate that like mindset about what learning really looks like, we're not going to really, and people feel confident saying, come in my classroom, walk into my learning environment, and you'll see kids learning, not I'm trying to emulate the teacher that I had, whether it was good or bad, with this idea of the ideal teacher. So I think that's just something that I want to continue to, like, I see lots of heads nodding. So I want you to like push on that idea. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Emily.
It's how we learn anything, right? So if I were to go to learn to bake a cake, it would be messy. I would do a little bit of watching YouTube. I'd connect with a local chef. I do this, I do that, right? And so I think that doesn't feel natural or normal to a lot of people who are used to seeing school in one way, but that is how we learn. That is how I were to learn if I were to pick up a new skill, you were to pick up a new skill. And so there's something that happens when we put those four walls up of school. Something changes in our minds, even though out in the world, in our own lives, that isn't how we naturally learn. And we know that. Like, pay attention to what you know, and what you feel when you're learning. And then think about how that shows up in the spaces where you're working with young people.
So a lot of people are asking, and I'll share kind of what I think, and I share in the book, but when we talk about learner-centered, there's a lot of like, what does that actually mean? So I'd love for you to share a little bit, when you think about learner-centered, what does that mean to you?
Sure. And I know there's lots of different ways that people couch this. For me and at Education Reimagined, we think about it as the gifts, the strengths, and what each learner brings as being valuable, as being something that should be honored and should be a part of their learning experience. And you can do that in lots of different ways. But in every space that's learner-centered, you typically see young people developing agency, young people working on competencies. So they're working towards skills, knowledge, dispositions that are meaningful for them. Another learner next to them might also be working on those same competencies, but maybe at a different time or different pace and demonstrating it in a different way. We also see learner-centered as not just confined to the classroom, right? I know your two kiddos are doing a lot of learning that's connecting with people, just not just at their school, right? Connecting with people in the real world to help them explore whatever it is that they're passionate about. And also that learning is personalized, relevant, and contextualized so that it matters. What you're learning matters to the young person. It doesn't mean that standards don't happen. It doesn't mean that there's not assessments and looking at what's going on with learners, but it fundamentally starts from a different place. That you are not filling a learner as an empty vessel, but the learner is someone that brings something to be revealed, to be untapped, and to be explored, which is a fundamentally different mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a paradigm shift, right? It starts with how we see learners and how we see the role of our education system. And at LCC, and you'll see this in the book too, that we start with based on that very same mindset, Emily.
Yeah.
Identifying what the knowledge, skills, and mindsets that we want young people to develop. So we talk about backwards mapping all the time in education, right? Like, oh, we got a backwards map from the standards. And I am proposing that we backwards map from the knowledge, skills, and dispositions more holistically that we want young people to develop. And when we start from those whole learner outcomes, the creativity, collaboration, communication that are very much, the standards are embedded in those, but they're more holistic, then we can think differently about how we design those learning experiences. And just like you said, Emily, and a lot of people will use different words. In some system, it's personalized. In some, it's mastery-based versus competency-based. The exact words matter less to me than the orientation around whole learner outcomes and the community itself coming together to define what learning should look like if your outcomes are new and different, right? If you are going beyond a standardized math score, or you're going beyond, ELA scores or reading scores, and you're thinking about the whole child, then you're thinking about what experiences do we need to be able to get there? And then ultimately those conditions that need to be in place to empower learners and their educators to get there.
Yeah, it's a fundamentally different starting point. Absolutely. I taught first and second grade. I also teach adult learners. And I remember walking into my first grade classroom and all the learners would come up to me and tell me about what their sister was doing, what their auntie was doing, all this stuff that they would tell me. And I used to shush it because I need to get to instructional time. That was my mindset then, right? But what I missed was this opportunity to start, Katie, like you just said, with those connections to who those young people were that were just like beaming. If you've ever walked into first grade classroom, you know what I'm talking about. They rushed the door to talk to you. Those connections and what those learners were interested in their lives is actually where I should have started, right? Yep. That's where I should have started. And then everything else will come. It's that connection to who they are and what they bring. Whether it's sharks or scuba diving, I don't know, but making those connections. And we know, I'm in a trauma-informed class right now, and everything about our bodies, our brains, our minds, all of the science says it's those connections and who we are as people and what we bring that we want to be seen. We want to bring that to space, and we don't want to leave it behind. And that's what school does right now. Asks you to leave that behind. And in learner-centered spaces, I think what Katie and I are both saying in similar and different ways is that start there, right? Yeah. Start there.
That's the shift, right? The second shift of relationships and social emotional learning are separate, or it's this add-on or this curriculum, really to moving to a place where it's the foundation of deep learning and meaningful connection. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, because we know we want good examples, right? Like, what are some examples that you've seen, Emily, where young people are able to build on those strengths and interests? What does that look like in a school community?
I have so many examples. So Katie knows this, but I've been so fortunate. I've traveled to like 35 states and just countless schools. I am just, like I said, an insatiable learner. And I think as an educator, one of the best ways to learn about your own practice and learn new things is to connect with others virtually, as well as go see what you can when you can, knowing that I'm very fortunate that I got to do that. With that said, a lot of the environments I saw and spaces I saw that were doing this work really well, they didn't look like traditional school all the time. One example is ACE Leadership Academy in New Mexico. They primarily serve learners who have actually traditional school system hasn't worked for them, and they've either been kicked out or dropped out by choice. And ACE Leadership really just works with them to build skills, to build competencies that are meaningful for them, and engages them in projects like redeveloping the sidewalks in the town. They partner with the Department of Transportation so learners can help rethink where sidewalks should go, because a lot of them walk to school. So ACE Leadership is one great example. Boston Day and Evening is a school that's in the heart of the city, in Boston, in Massachusetts, and they do an exceptional job of paying attention to who learners are, what they care about, and then working from there to build what they do across subject areas and across what learners are working on, be it a project or what have you. The Defenders of the Water School is on Lakota land, and that's a school that's really based on Indigenous values of that community. And it's about lifting up how the values of the Lakota peoples are woven into what learning looks like. So I think that's another example, and it doesn't look anything like school. I actually want to learn more about that place because I've not visited. And then
Emily, yeah. So both of us have been to Odyssey STEM Academy that's in Paramount. And, you know, I share this image a lot, but I think it's worth noting is sometimes we're like, oh, I can't do that because, you know, our building looks this, you know, the same as it has, or we have these 4 walls. We can't start doing that. Odyssey, 4 walls, similar schools. They've done things like they just use Post-it notes for students to put up on a wall, their strengths, their interests, their values, their career aspirations. Sometimes it's as simple as just having kids name them, you know, and like, and it's a function to change. My husband, as many of you know, is a high school teacher, and he started having these conversations with his students. And the first time he asked them about their strengths, 50% of them couldn't name something they were good at. Right. So if our 10th graders, if our first graders are leaving the school building and don't know something that they're passionate about or don't feel like they can name their strengths, fundamentally we have a problem, right? And so I think let's just even start with carving out time to identify, who are you as young people? What do you value? And if they don't know, let's help them. If they don't see who they are as gifted and talented people, and they don't see the ways that they see the world as meaningful, then I feel like that's our obligation number one. You know, like you said, connect with them, hear their stories, but also help them connect with themselves and understand the things that they bring. And then we can create that more inclusive community. But I just think those are some simple examples too, that don't take a new building, a new vision. It's, you know, any educator can do that.
Yeah. And a lot of the examples I've seen from across the country are not in swanky new buildings. They're not in, in B150, like where I taught at Lakewood Elementary, right? Like magic can happen anywhere. I think to your point too, Katie, right? You say, well, what are you interested in, 7-year-old Emily? I don't know, right? You know, right? I don't know. But part of that too is as educators, bringing our own interests and giving ourselves permission to bring who we are into the space, and naming the things that you like and naming the things that make you unique in who you are, right? And that also instills this curiosity in young people to say, oh, you care about me, you care about what I'm curious about, and it's okay to bring that to this space, right? So I think just as much as we want to bring that out in learners, we also want to bring that out in educators. I think another great place that does this is Cajon Valley. They focus a lot on, and I'm saying a lot of names, I'm going to put all these links in the Slack so that you all can have them, of all these districts and schools and environments I'm talking about. But Cajon Valley in California is a great example where they spend a ton of time talking to learners about their strengths and what their interests are, and really dedicating a lot of the day explicitly to that. And I think the other thing I'll note there is there's a misnomer that focusing so much on the individual then reinforces this ruthless Western idealism of like competition, individualism. And I actually think that it's quite the opposite. If you honor people in a space, then they see that the other people care, and the belonging in community starts to grow, and you begin to create a collaborative, which we're doing here on this call, where people care about who you are individually, but also about the group. And so I'll just name that it's not individualizing for the sake of people doing their own thing on their own accord. It's about seeing the strengths so that you can come together and you can tap into each other's strengths and interests to build that community.
Yeah, so we have a few questions that came in, and these are great questions. So building on what you just said, Emily, it's not going, just doing whatever you want. So this is a question that came in to clarify, when we are defining learning outcomes, what about district standards? Are those part of outcomes? I want to move beyond that, but my administrators are bound by those standards and tests. So we hear this all the time. And thank you for clarifying in the question. Absolutely, standards are part of those outcomes. They just aren't the end, right? So foundational skills, literacy, math, all of our standards are important. And a lot of times the standards are the skills, but the curriculum and the way we choose to teach them is what's dictated by the curriculum. So if you look at the standards and you think about the outcomes you have, we certainly are not ignoring them, but there's different ways to get to those outcomes and to get to those standards. And my view and my experience as a teacher, as a leader working in central office, if we focus narrowly on those low-level skills and the standards, and we don't focus on the whole child and the connection and the allowing for strengths and interests, we won't truly get to those outcomes we want because we're thinking about it so narrowly. So it's not ignoring the standards. It's just simply thinking about how we embrace what we know about learners and learning to actually get there. And I know, Emily, you probably have lots to say about this, but a lot of times there's a ton of research on project-based learning that will show that when you're using with the learning sciences, you're focusing on authentic project-based learning, learners actually achieve those same standards at greater rates than they do with traditional curricula and resources. So sometimes, as we talked about, our narrow mindset about how we have to teach actually prevents us from reaching those outcomes that we really want. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, Emily.
How long do we have? I could just talk forever. I know I had a scope and sequence, y'all. I mean, I get it. I had a scope and sequence. My lesson plans my last year of teaching had to be down to 5-minute intervals. So I get it. And I don't want to discount that reality, but I promise you there are ways to hit a lot of those standards and not do standard learning. They are not standard humans in front of you. So don't superimpose standards onto humans. You don't have to, I promise you. And you will get to much deeper outcomes if you start with who the learners are in front of you, or whatever. Let's take a theme, start with a theme, right? And then figure out who the young people are in front of you, what they're interested in, where they are in their progressions, and needing to develop competencies, and then say, how are we going to get closer to understanding this set of standards or this theme? And I promise you, if you start from a different place and don't start with the standards, you will get to deeper outcomes. I could say, like I said, I could say a whole bunch more about that, but I'll use my example before of learning to bake a cake. If I want to learn to bake a cake, if I start with the standards, I could miss out on all of the rich learning experience about how to cook, what it takes to add my own flair, what it takes to add my own tastes and flavors if I just followed a standard recipe, right? This is a terrible example, but I'm going with it. But if you don't start with the standards and start, I guess what I'm saying is the passion, the interest, and who the people are in front of you, you will get to those standards. I promise you. Happy to share more offline about project-based learning and all the other ways that I see that happening in learner-centered environments.
And, I think just to put a pin in that, it's designing from that as the outcome. Devin Vadichka, our CEO, always says, you can hold me accountable to the outcome, or you can hold me accountable to the process, but you can't do both. Yep. And so we hold accountable to the outcome and allow the process to vary by the learner. But if we standardize the process, then we may or may not actually get to the outcome that we desire.
I'll give one more. I have a real life example. Iowa Big is a school in Cedar Rapids. If you talk to any learner from that environment, they got the outcomes. They've met the outcomes. I went there once and there was a learner who was talking about a persuasive letter that they had to write to the town involving, it was also something involving transportation, I believe. You could teach persuasive writing to someone out of that context or out of that environment, and talking to the learner would look totally different than it would like talking to the learner at Iowa Big, who knew what they were doing, who knew why they were doing it. It was connected to something they cared about. And you better believe that they hit a ton of standards and had a much deeper outcome and deeper learning experience than just taking a standard and convincing them that they needed to write a persuasive letter to me because I said so.
Yeah. And so one of the things, part 2 of the book, we're going to go in next week much deeper into these learning experiences and talk concretely about them. But I know that one of the things we really wanted to do today is get you into groups and talk to one another, because there's so much wisdom on this call, and we want to make sure that you get to share and connect with a few people as well.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope that you were able to connect with someone that maybe you've met before, but maybe not. And our hope here really is that we continue to build this ecosystem and this network of folks that want to have conversations just like this. So thank you all for diving in. Is Katie back here? Katie, would you mind sharing your screen?
I am back. I was in the groups. Well, you can see all of my screen now.
It's okay. Well, then you know what? I'm just going to talk through it. Yep.
Great.
Great.
So as we were in the groups, there's already great suggestions for affinity groups and observations for next week as people want to dive into different conversations. One of the things that we want to encourage, there's many of you who are like, oh, I got a great idea. I've accomplished something. So I want you to, do a check out, even if you just think on your own. If you want to share in Slack, I believe Kelsey has set up these 4 strands in the Slack channel. If there's something that you want to offer help, a lot of people in different sessions were like, I have a resource for this. I'm going to share it with you. I'll post it. So if there's something that you want to share or come to me for help with, please add it. If there's something that's concrete and a next step, we'd love to know about it. And we'd love to be able to cheer you on and support and just see what people are thinking about. Or if there's something that you need help with, please definitely put that in the channel. And there's a lot of people here who have great resources, and we will all jump in to support if there's things that you need help with. But as you've been connecting and engaging in the Slack community, as Kelsey said, we want this conversation to be ongoing. And so this is a way for one to reflect on the day-to-day, but also to encourage and keep the conversations going. And with that, as you're doing that, I'm going to pass it to Kelsey to just talk about the next steps for the rest of the week.
Well, great. Well, I'm really excited because our team has been working behind the scenes to launch this book club for a few weeks. So we did it. We're here. We closed out our first session. So thank you all for joining and being patient and diving into this work with us. So today's just the beginning. We have our live session today. Tomorrow, like I said, you'll get an email with the recording of the first half of this hopefully minus my sharing glitches, but you will get the recording if you want to listen to it or share it with someone in your network. But Thursday is the next time we'd like to hear from you. Thursday is our Bright Spot Day. So if you're on social media, you'll see us on Twitter and on Instagram posting our bright spots. The other thing we have is a Bright Spots channel in Slack. So, I know we were throwing around a lot of awesome examples. We'd love to hear about something happening at your school or in your classroom, something that's inspiring you or encouraging you. But Thursday will be the next time we would love to hear from you on social media or in Slack. And then on Saturday, you'll get the tee up email for part 2, and we will repeat this cycle all over again next week. So I'm just going to close it out with some gratitude for you all. Thank you for creating the time and space to join us. We so look forward to diving into this book deeper and deeper with you all. Katie, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom. So grateful for you both. Yeah, I feel like I grew today. So thank you all. And I'm excited to see what all of your next steps and the ways that you're going to support in the Slack conversation. So thank you all.